Do not feel like you're too small to matter, and don't feel like you have to be ultra professional. It's important to be professional, but sometimes small businesses like to appear ultra corporate and bigger than they are. And I'm just like, you can completely tell people it's you, and it's not going to turn people off.
Microphone check 1 2. What is this?
You're now listening to a brand new episode of the Play Big Faster podcast.
Look what you done started. Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of the Play Big Faster podcast. We're joined in this episode by Mickie Kennedy. Mickie is the president of eReleases, press release distribution, and a poet. We have lots of great things to go over today about PR, why it's important, and how it can actually help you in your business. Mickie, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So tell us, how did you get started in PR?
It's funny. About 27 years ago, finished a MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry. And my career plan was to write poetry and wait tables. And so I did that for a summer after graduating and realized that my ankles hurt, my knees hurt, my back hurt, my mind was zapped at the end of a 10-hour shift. And I just wasn't getting any reading or writing done. So I decided I would pivot into a safe office job. And I got hired by a telecom research startup as employee number 3. And they saw that I had writing backgrounds. They wanted me to write press releases and send them out, which I did via fax. And that's how long ago it was. And at first I didn't do really well. And then I tried to look at what journalists were actually writing, the articles they were writing. And I noticed they tend to follow a story arc. And then I realized, well, that makes sense. We've been telling stories since we've been able to communicate and sit around fires or tell stories to our children at night. And so it's very natural, this whole rise and fall and this whole story idea. So I started writing press releases from that perspective about telecom data. I was just telling the story behind some of the data. And that the first one I did was why one country in the Caribbean had more inbound and outbound telecom traffic to the US than almost all the other ones combined. And it was because it was the center for 1-900 numbers at the time. And people didn't realize that calls were being routed through that country for 1-900 numbers. And for those of you who certainly will not know what a 1-900 number was, all of these different things had 1-900 numbers, and you could call a number and get advice on your pet, or you could get your horoscope, or you could even do dating, party lines and stuff like that. And you would be charged anywhere from 50 cents all the way up to a couple of dollars a minute. And it would just be added to your landline phone bill. And when I sent that press release out, it got picked up by the Financial Times, The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and 3 telecom trade publications. And I was like, ooh, I might be onto something. And so I continued to write more story arc based press releases, and they continued to get picked up. And I just saw how transformative it was for this business. We got major sales leads. Our reputation just escalated in the industry. Everyone knew about us. And we initially only got orders from telecom companies, telecom attorneys, and telecom analysts. And after that, we started getting orders from investment firms and hedge funds and people who just wanted to look at another source of data and as a barometer of economic health. And they got that idea from some of the releases we were doing, where we were tying economic growth to a rise in international telecom traffic, usually preceding by a few years. And I just felt like I could do this for other businesses. And then a lot of journalists I was faxing started to call and say, could you start emailing this to us instead of faxing? And so that's the light bulb for me. I was like, I can just email people. That's how I started. I had spent about a year just networking with journalists, mostly on bulletin boards, which also a lot of people probably aren't familiar with, but they were very popular at the time, very text-based, like message boards kind of things, and lots of different topics. And it was a place where a lot of people collected, and most journalists were very accepting at the time. And that was it. I launched in October of 1998 with about 10,000 journalists in my database. And I've just been going strong ever since. We've now added PR Newswire distribution. They approached us and liked what we were doing. And they charged $1,600 for a 600-word press release. And you get a national distribution through PR Newswire, through us now, and you don't have to pay anything close to that, probably about a third to 40% what it would cost if you went directly to the wire.
Wow. And so for those of us who are not very savvy with terms like public relations and Newswire. What is the relationship between like public relations, advertising, and marketing? Do I need all of those things in my business?
Well, a lot of people will say you really don't need PR, but you generally need paid advertising. And the reason that people feel comfortable with paid advertising is it's easy to look at the metrics and see if you're winning. There's usually good tracking and you can see your ROI and what your ad spend is. The thing is that most marketing isn't really profitable. And I think that a lot of small businesses are stuck and they feel like they don't have any other options. And when they look at PR, and public relations in general, they just feel that it's too expensive for them. And the truth is, that was why I got started because PR firms might charge anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 and up a year, and do require a 1 year commitment. Where when I launched, I just do it a la carte and still do it a la carte, where you pay per press release moving forward. And with a new customer special, and you can write your own release. We have a lot of templates and samples, and you can send out a release for as little as $349 through us. And again, you're getting something that would be closer to $1,500 plus if you went directly to the Newswire. So it's a really great opportunity. That being said, going back to a Newswire and the importance of it is in the US, we have basically a duopoly where journalists go for stories and fish in two ponds, and that's PR Newswire, and the other one is Business Wire. There was a third company that made inroads, and then they lost it. And then they pivoted to just meet SEC disclosure requirements for publicly traded companies. And they actually even are known to tell people, hey, you really don't want journalists looking too carefully at your releases. So use us and save money. And the reason I think that the two wires are more important today than ever is the proliferation of media databases. I started in email and I've had to abandon it. And fortunately, I have the wire and we focus on that. And the reason is when journalists signed up for me over 20 some years ago, email was a new and a novelty, and they might get 20 emails a day. And now they might get 20 emails a minute. And because of these databases, a golf club company who just spent $10,000 for a yearly license to this database logs in and sees there's 2,700 journalists that are interested in golf and outdoor sports equipment. And they realize there's 500,000 people in this database and they can send it to anybody. And so they talk themselves into, hey, bankers love to play golf, business people love to play golf. And then they start spamming banking analysts and people who cover finance who would never cover golf clubs. And journalists, if you look online today, journalists are just grumbling about email and how they hate it and that they find it useless. And PR firms that pitch by email to journalists they know, they just hope that they're whitelisted and filtered to a individual filter, but most of them are having to follow up by phone and explicitly tell them what the subject of the email is and how to find their email. It's that bad. And many are just resorting to pitching by email, which journalists don't love. It's the only way to reach them outside of the Newswire. Other people are familiar with other types of wires. There's AP, Associated Press, Reuters, and a few others, and they work differently. They don't transmit press releases. They actually submit articles that they've written and license it to others. At the Baltimore Sun, which is in my neighborhood, it's 5 o'clock. They're getting ready to leave for the day. The Supreme Court announces some major verdict. They know that they can just pull the story from the Associated Press and it's high quality, and they don't have to spend hours writing it and just pay that licensing fee, or they already have a licensing arrangement in place where they get to use a certain amount of articles during a time period. And in addition to that, what complicates this whole industry even more is there's probably 30 or 40 companies online with Wire and Newswire in their names that are not wires and that they don't reach journalists. They are into syndication, where your press release gets replicated on a bunch of websites. And that does happen even with PR Newswire, but that's not what you're looking for. Often these releases are on places on websites that nobody sees. If you go to that website and do a search, you can't pull up that press release. It's a distraction at best. And so what we look for And PR is true earned media, where a journalist looks at your release and then they write the article about you. And it's original content, and it really sends a powerful signal to their readers, because their readers trust writers, they trust the publications. And when you get that kind of coverage, it really does boost your visibility and your credibility.
It's so interesting, your take on email, because I talk to so many people who are in marketing and a lot of email marketers who swear by email for everything. But I guess as it relates to PR, and you're saying that it doesn't work as well, what sort of metrics should somebody maybe be looking for in their business if they're using PR as a primary way for people to discover more about them and their business?
So I think that the traditional marketing metrics are good, like return on investment. It's a little bit harder to attribute what came from earned media. If you have an average month and you know that your revenues, say $25,000, and you got two or three articles that month, and all of a sudden your revenue that month was $32,000, you could pretty comfortably attribute $5,000 to $7,000 of that to the PR effort. In addition to that, take your earned media, those links, share them on social media, share them in your newsletters, put them in front of your leads. If you convert your leads at, say, 20% and 80% never convert, you will find that putting earned media in front of people, you will improve that conversion rate. And the reason for that is very understandable. It's like social proof or an implied endorsement when someone writes about you. It's a huge signal of trust, and it gives an emotional response and an amplification of you as being a really great legitimate company. And so the 80% of the people that wouldn't convert with you, maybe you convert an additional 10% of those or more. And so that is really valuable. And the great thing is it can be put on your website, screenshots of the articles, logos from these places, links as long as they're active, but never assume those links are going to stay active forever, ever. Organizations in the media and news are always changing their content management system, CMS. And a lot of times what they do, they try to port over the old stuff. And after a while, they just say, we're only going to port over part of it or none of it. And your links might go inactive. And it might take 7 years or longer, or sometimes even less. Just be sure you've collected all of that. There's some really great extensions on Chrome for taking screenshots of your entire page up and down that you can save as an image as well as a PDF. I save them as both. And then you can use those going forward forever. And be sure to add them to your website. They really do boost your credibility and the leads that come in. Also track the number of leads that you get on average a month. And if you've done some earned media and you see an increase in leads, it's easy to attribute those leads to that earned media. You'll often find that the leads that you do get from earned media are often a shorter lead time. So if your sales cycle, especially in B2B, you have long sales cycles, maybe it's 6 months, you might find that with these leads, they convert in 4 months. And they're also probably less likely to be shopping by price. They came in through this authority that you have, and they see you as higher value from the beginning. They're less likely to shop around and try to get the cheapest price. They want to work with who they feel is the best customer. For that reason, I see a pattern with startups. We work with a lot of people that appear on Shark Tank. And one of the things that I've noticed is the producers recommend they do a press release before their episode airs, and many of them recommend us. And so they'll come to us, they'll use us, and then they'll do a series of releases afterwards. And what they're looking for is a bed of earned media that they can put on their website, put the logos there, share the links and screenshots of the articles, and then with that credibility and all of that in a package on their website, then they start paid advertising, because they know that if they did paid advertising before and would have converted at 5%, they know that with that earned media and all of those logos and being on a TV show, that they might convert now at 10, 12%. And that's a cycle that I see with a lot of startups that are very smart, where they feel like we really don't want to cut on the paid advertising until we have that bed of earned media in which to rest on and help improve our conversion rates.
So you mentioned that your business model has a done for you or done with you or do it yourself. Is that kind of what you said when we first started? That you have,
Correct.
but I know that
Correct.
there are benefits from working with people like you who know what to do. So what does that look like? If I have a startup and I don't know anything about public relations. What does it look like to work with you and have you do it for me?
We would have a conversation over Zoom. We would brainstorm, get to know your business, get to know your industry, think about some ideas. I have several strategic types of releases that I like to fit people in. So I go through those and how they might apply to them specifically. And that's how that works. But that being said, it's also expensive. I charge $10,000 and it's for a year, and it's a series of 10 releases over that 1 year, one of which will be a survey or study in your industry. So it's a little bit more involved. And we work with trade associations to leverage their community and send the survey to and get the results and stuff like that. It's a little bit more involved, but there's guaranteed earned media. We guarantee 6 articles over the year. Often it's over 10 articles. So it's a really good ROI from that standpoint of about $1,000 a pickup. And that's what that looks like. That being said, I do tell people, try it yourself. It is not rocket science. And when I talked about the strategic ideas for press releases, I'm going to be the first to say that 97% of the press releases that get issued over a wire do not generate earned media. And looking at that, you think your odds are not great. But what I've done is looked at the 3% that do get picked up and found the patterns within it. And one of them is the survey. When I coach someone through a survey, they generally get 8 articles, if not more, from that one press release. And it's a matter of asking really relevant questions right now that people in your industry would want to know, and then building out a press release around that. And it is a little more involved because you're working with a trade association, but I just approached an independent or small trade association in your industry. I avoid the big ones because they're too big. They will not cooperate. They do their own media. They get called by the media often because they're the most well-known association. But if you look at it, there are so many smaller associations out there. Some of them are very mid-Atlantic, or they're aligned to women only or something like that. But there's also ones that are pretty representative of your industry. Like in the PR world, there's one for PR firms of 50 employees or less. And that's probably more than 80% of the industry. And so that would be a great association to align yourself with. And you just approach them and say, hey, here's a link. I usually use SurveyMonkey and say, here's a link to a survey I'm doing. Could you send this out to your members? We're looking for at least 100 responses. And if we get that in exchange for doing this, we'll put your name in the press release we'll be issuing over the wire. And it's a great opportunity for you to get some media attention as well. About 2/3 of the time, the first association we approach will say yes. And it generally works very well. And this is something that you can do. I have a video masterclass that briefly talks about each of these strategic ideas that I do, and it's completely free. And it's a great place for anybody considering PR to start, because if you build a PR campaign focused on these strategic releases, you will more likely get more hits than misses. And that's available at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it's a video that's less than an hour, because I realized that the last class I bought, when I saw it was 24 hours of video, I just never completed it. I started and life gets in the way. It really takes, it seems like 200 hours to finish 24 hours of videos. And so I wanted to make this very digestible and easy for people to see. And it's a great way to take these ideas, audit them, and send them through your business in particular. And if you focus on that, you will have more success, because you're doing the 3% of releases that do get picked up. And I think that's one of the biggest differentiators between me is I move over 10,000 releases a year. And while I'm not in the day-to-day operations, I get to see at a high level what's working, and it allows me to educate my clients on trends that I see that are working, things that they can do. The most common press release that we get is the product launch press release. And it's usually, here's a new product, here's a list of features, and here's a buy button or a page to learn more. And I talked about the story arc. Not a lot of ability to turn that into a story. But if you incorporated a use case study and said, hey, company A was losing 7% a year. They used our logistics software solution. And at the end of 90 days, they were already forecasting that they would be net profitable by 5% by the end of the year. And then have a quote by them talking about how easy it was to incorporate, or something specific that's just wonderful about the solution that you have. That's a story arc. That's something that a journalist can build a story about. And it's about the launch of your product, but it gives a story that inspires the audience and gets them along for the ride. One of the biggest things to note about strategic releases is writing them with the journalist in mind, not you, not your goals. You can achieve your goals, but you first have to solve the journalists, because they're the gatekeeper to their audience, and they have to determine, is this a message that will entertain or educate, or ideally both, for my audience? And so many times we write from a me perspective, and you need to take them into account. And how can I make this more meaningful for them? In the case of the logistics software solution, one of the things you can do is also incorporate publicly available data to show the stakes of why this is so important. You can talk about, say, in the transportation industry, 67% of businesses fail in the first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability, and then go into more about your solution. But it gives the stakes and makes it like, wow, this is really something that's needed in the industry and can perhaps solve that problem for a lot of people.
Mickey, if you had one piece of advice just to share with entrepreneurs on how to play big faster in the public relations game, what would it be?
I think for me is to not feel like you're too small to matter, and don't feel like you have to be ultra professional. It's important to be professional, but sometimes small businesses like to appear ultra corporate and bigger than they are. I can often tell that you're a one person shop when they're making up names for the press contact and another name for the quote in their press release. And I'm just like, you can completely tell people it's you, and it's not going to turn people off. When it comes to being small, it's an advantage for PR. Journalists do not get accolades, and they do not get shares of their articles. And that's one of the metrics that they use to see if the article was good, for covering the Microsofts of the world, the Googles, the Amazons. They have to cover them because they're big and they are a mite in the industry. But the most shares that they get and the most accolades that journalists get is when they put the spotlight on a new tool, a new piece of software, a new product, a new company that no one knew about. And often these are mom and pops. Sometimes they're even side hustles. They're people who are doing this on the side, and they have a full-time job, and they're hoping that they can turn this into a full-time business. But don't feel that you have to hide it. When the people go on Shark Tank, one of the first things they do is they share their vulnerability. They share their story. Sometimes it's inspirational. Sometimes it's funny. It really cuts through, and you get that human interest element, that immediate empathy by seeing the person behind the business. So feel free to put that out there and include that in your press release. Share your origin story, share what motivates you. If it's not the lead of a press release, you can incorporate it into the boilerplate. And that's usually a section in most releases at the bottom that usually says about company or about the person. And it's about a paragraph long. And you can incorporate your elements of your story there. It gives you a huge advantage. A journalist looking at two articles and they see that one, it's going to tug at them a little bit more, and they're going to root for you a little bit more. It's the reason that so many blog posts and articles I see about Indiegogos or Kickstarters. I follow that journey of this person who just said, all I wanted was this one product. It's so similar to something else that's out there, but I couldn't get them to incorporate this. So I just decided to do it myself. And I'm like, yeah, you can do this. The next thing I know, I'm helping support them. And I don't need that product, but I feel that entrepreneurial spirit, and that same thing can be conveyed in your press release, and it can really go a long ways in helping you get media pickup.
Mickey, thank you so much for joining us. How can we find you if we want to engage more and find out more about PR or even work with you?
Sure. So eReleases.com is the website. We have chat, email, and phone. There's no salespeople, it's just editors. And we're pretty free with providing advice and assistance to people, especially if it's your first time. And again, that free masterclass that I mentioned is eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And our social media is on the lower right of our website. So feel free to reach out to us there. And it's a direct link to my LinkedIn. So that's also a great way to get a hold of me individually.
Thank you so much. And until next time, play big faster.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and remember to play big faster.